The market of the colony was filled with noise, but for David it felt strangely empty. He walked past glowing stalls where traders shouted about rare metals, exotic fruits, and strange liquids stored in glass jars. Everyone was busy, bargaining and laughing, but then his eyes caught something different. In the corner, near a wall covered with rusted panels, sat a girl. She was not human. Her skin had a pale silver tone, and her eyes were wide but dull with hunger. She was so thin that her bones almost showed through her clothes, which were torn and covered in dust. David stopped walking. For a moment he thought she might already be dead, but then he saw her fingers move weakly. She looked up at him, and in that short glance he felt something heavy in his chest. She was starving. People walked past her without a care. Some even glanced at her with disgust. A pair of alien men laughed, tossing a small piece of rotten bread near her feet, as if mocking her. She tried to reach for it, but her hand trembled so much that she failed to pick it up. David moved closer. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, not sure if she could even understand him. Her lips parted, but no sound came. She looked frightened, like a wild animal cornered by hunters. He crouched down, ignoring the stares of others. "Can you walk?" He tried again. The girl blinked, then shook her head weakly. For a moment, David hesitated. Bringing a stranger, especially an alien, into his home could mean trouble. The colony was not a kind place, and most people saw outsiders as trash. But leaving her here to die felt impossible. He sighed, removed his jacket, and draped it gently over her shoulders. She flinched at the touch, but didn't resist. "I'll help you," he said firmly. He slid his arms under her fragile body and lifted her up. She was so light, it was like carrying a child. Her head rested against his chest, and he felt how cold she was. A few traders stopped to stare, some whispering insults. One man shouted, "Leave her! She's not worth saving!" But David ignored them and kept walking. On the way to his small house at the edge of the colony, he felt her move slightly. She whispered something in a weak voice. He leaned down to hear. "Why? Are you helping me?" Her words were broken, but clear enough. David didn't know what to answer. He only said, "Because no one else will." When they reached his home, he laid her carefully on the couch. The girl's eyes followed every movement he made, full of suspicion and fear. He went into the kitchen and brought water first. She took it slowly, as if expecting it to be poisoned. After a few gulps, she coughed and tears filled her eyes. Then he brought food, just simple bread and soup. She hesitated for a long time before tasting. But once the first bite went down, she ate with desperate speed, as though afraid the food would be taken away. David watched quietly. He felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. She looked less like a stranger and more like someone who had been through a war. Her hands shook as she ate, her shoulders tense. After finishing, she leaned back, breathing heavily. Her silver eyes lifted toward him, and this time there was a spark of something, confusion mixed with gratitude. "What's your name?" David asked carefully. She looked at him for a while, then pressed her hand weakly against her chest. "Lyra," she whispered. "Lyra," he repeated, nodding. "I'm David." For a moment, silence filled the room, broken only by the sound of her uneven breathing. She kept glancing around, as if the walls might open and reveal hidden enemies. He noticed her scars, thin lines across her arms, the kind of by bindings. She had suffered more than hunger. As night fell, David set up a blanket and pillow for her on the couch. She pulled the blanket around herself tightly, curling up like a child. He turned off the lights and sat nearby with a book, but he could feel her eyes watching him from the dark. She did not trust him yet, and he understood. Hours later, a sharp cry startled him. Lyra twisted in her sleep, muttering in her language, tears running down her face. She kicked the blanket away, gasping like she was drowning. David rushed to her side and touched her shoulder lightly. "It's okay. You're safe," he said. Her eyes opened suddenly, glowing faintly in the dim light. She grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. For a second he thought she might attack him, but then her grip softened and her body trembled. Slowly, she released his hand and turned her face away, ashamed. David sat back, his heart beating fast. He realized her fear was not only about food or safety, it was something deeper. Whoever had left her starving in that market had broken more than her body. They had broken her spirit. He leaned against the wall, watching her until she fell back into restless sleep. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But one thing was certain. By choosing to help her, He had stepped into something far larger than he understood. And as the night grew colder, Lyra's faint whisper reached him again, almost too soft to hear. Why? Human? David closed his eyes, unable to answer. He didn't know the reason himself, but something inside told him this decision would change his life forever. The morning light slipped through the cracks of the window, but David felt uneasy before even opening his eyes. The air inside the small house was heavy, silent in a way that pressed on his chest. When he turned his head, he froze. Lyra stood in the kitchen doorway, her thin hands wrapped tightly around the handle of his sharpest knife. The metal blade caught the weak sunlight, reflecting it across the walls. Her expression was unreadable. Her silver eyes locked on him, calm yet tense, as if she had been waiting for him to move. David's body stiffened. His first thought was that she had tricked him, that bringing her here had been a dangerous mistake. Slowly, he sat up, keeping his hands visible. "What are you doing?" he asked carefully, his voice low. Lyra didn't answer at first. Her grip on the knife trembled, her knuckles pale. Then she whispered, almost too quietly, "I cannot trust. Not yet." David felt a chill run down his spine. He studied her. Thin frame, hollow cheeks, scars running across her arms. She looked fragile, but the knife in her hands made the moment dangerous. He didn't want to make her feel cornered. "I'm not your enemy," he said, trying to sound calm. "If I wanted to harm you, I wouldn't have carried you here last night." For a long moment, she didn't move. Her chest rose and fell with quick, shallow breaths. Finally, she lowered the knife just a little, though her eyes stayed sharp on him. "People smile, then hurt," she said bitterly. "It is what they do." David stood slowly and walked to the table, keeping his movements clear and gentle. He pulled out a chair and sat, leaving space between them. "I can't undo what others did to you," he said softly. "But if you're afraid, you don't need to hold a weapon against me. You can leave it on the table." Her lips pressed tightly, her gaze flickering between him and the knife. For a long breath, she seemed ready to resist. But then, as if her strength broke, she set the blade on the counter. She stepped back, her hands trembling, her whole body shaking with silent fear. David let out the breath he had been holding. He didn't move toward the knife. Instead, he picked up 2 cups and poured water, placing one on the table where she could see it. "Sit. Drink." Lyra hesitated, then edged closer, never turning her back on him. She sat slowly, her eyes fixed on the cup. After a long pause, she reached for it and sipped. Her throat worked as she swallowed, and when she placed the cup down, her hands were still trembling. "Who left you there?" David asked gently. Her jaw tightened. For a long time she said nothing, staring at the table as though the wood itself carried her past. Finally her voice cracked. "My own people. They traded me. Said I was useless. Said better to sell me than keep me alive." David felt anger boil inside him, but he didn't let it show. He clenched his hands under the table instead. "That's not true," he said firmly. "You're alive. That means you matter." Her eyes snapped up to him, wide with disbelief. "You don't know me. You don't know what I am." "You're someone who deserves a chance," David replied without hesitation. For the first time since he had met her, she seemed caught off guard. Her mouth opened as if to argue, but no words came out. She looked away, pressing her hands together tightly, hiding the expression on her face. A tense silence followed, broken only by the hum of machinery outside the house. Then she spoke again, quieter this time. "If they find me, they will kill me, and you too." David leaned back, watching her carefully. "Then we won't let them find you." Her gaze lifted slowly, confusion and a flicker of something else, hope, shining in her silver eyes. She wanted to believe him, but fear chained her words. Outside, distant footsteps echoed in the street, a patrol passing by. Lyra stiffened at the sound, her body trembling again. David noticed and stood, moving to the window. He glanced at the soldiers moving past, their armor glinting under the morning sun, searching for someone. His jaw tightened. He turned back to Lyra, who was gripping the edge of the table with white knuckles. "They're not here for you," he whispered, though deep down he wasn't sure. But the way she sat, frozen with terror, told him she believed otherwise. And David realized something unsettling. By helping her, he might have already put both their lives in danger. David found her still awake that night, sitting on the floor near the couch with her knees pulled to her chest. The knife she had taken earlier now lay untouched beside her, but her eyes carried the same storm of fear. When he stepped closer, she flinched, her silver gaze darting to the door as if expecting soldiers to burst through at any moment. "You don't have to sit there," David said quietly. "The couch is yours." Lyra shook her head slowly, strands of her tangled hair falling over her face. "I cannot sleep easy," she whispered. "Every place is danger." He crouched near her, not too close. "Not here. I told you, no one will harm you." Her lips trembled. She lifted her arm, showing faint marks, thin, ugly scars across her wrist, like she had once been shackled. "Do you know why they starved me, human? Do you know why they left me to die?" David's chest tightened. He didn't answer, waiting for her to speak. "They call me cursed," Lyra said bitterly. "My blood is wrong. My family, my clan, they trade me away like broken metal. I was sold for scraps, tossed between hands until no one wanted me." Her voice cracked, and she dug her nails into her skin as if to erase the memory. David felt anger rising again, but he kept his voice steady. "That doesn't make you worthless. It makes them cruel." Her head jerked toward him, eyes narrowing. "You speak like you understand, but if they find me here, they will kill you too. You would die for nothing." He met her glare with steady calm. "Maybe, but I won't leave you out there." Her breath caught. She stared at him for a long time as if testing the truth in his eyes. Slowly, she looked away, whispering, "You are strange, for a human." Before he could answer, a sharp sound outside the window made them both freeze. Heavy boots striking against metal ground, the muffled clatter of weapons. Lyra's whole body stiffened. She scrambled back toward the shadows, her voice a broken hiss. "They're searching. They always search." David moved silently to the window and peered through the gap. His heart pounded as he saw armored figures moving down the narrow street, scanning every doorway. Their helmets reflected the dull orange glow of the colony lamps, their weapons ready. One of them carried a hollow slate with shifting images. He saw faces appear on the screen, wanted fugitives. And then, unmistakably, Lyra's. David pulled away from the window, his face pale. She was right, they were hunting her. He looked back at her, crouched low, shaking with fear. Her lips moved in a whisper he almost didn't hear. "If they find me, I will be dragged away. And you." Her eyes glistened. "They will burn your home to ash." For the first time, David felt the weight of the danger he had stepped into. He had taken her in without thinking, driven by instinct. Now, soldiers patrolled outside his door, searching for the very girl he had saved. He could hand her over and end this before it went too far. One word, one signal, and they would pass him by. But when he looked at her, thin arms wrapped tightly around herself, her eyes begging silently for mercy, he knew there was no choice. He crossed the room quickly, kneeling beside her. "Listen to me," he whispered urgently. "No one will take you, not while I'm here." Her breath shook as she looked up at him. For the first time, he saw something different in her expression. The fear was still there, but beneath it, a faint spark of trust flickered. Outside, the sound of boots grew louder, stopping just beyond the door. David's stomach clenched as a harsh voice barked orders. Lyra's hands dug into his arm, her whisper trembling like a final plea. "Please, don't let them find me." David pressed his finger to his lips, his own heartbeat roaring in his ears. He could already see the shadows of soldiers moving across the window frame. Any moment now, they might step inside. And as the silence thickened, David realized that from this point forward, his life was no longer his own. It was tied to hers. The knock on the door was not polite. It was a heavy, commanding pound that made the walls vibrate. David froze where he stood, his muscles locked. Lyra's eyes widened, glowing faintly in the dim room, and she pressed herself deeper into the shadows as if her body could vanish into the floor. The pounding came again, followed by a sharp, metallic voice. "Open. Routine search." David's mind raced. He glanced at the window where the shadows of armored soldiers shifted. He whispered quickly, "Basement. Now." Lyra hesitated, fear choking her movements. He grabbed her hand firmly, pulling her across the room. She stumbled, but he guided her to the hidden panel in the floor, a small hatch he had used only for storage. He shoved crates aside, revealing the narrow opening. "Go," he urged. Her silver eyes searched his face, mistrust battling with desperation. Then the pounding at the door grew louder, shaking dust from the beams above. Lyra's breath caught, and without another word, she lowered herself into the dark hole. David closed the hatch just as the door burst open. 3 soldiers entered. their armor gleaming under the pale light. Their visors glowed red as they scanned the room. One of them raised a device that hummed faintly, sending thin beams of light across the floor and walls. David forced his voice to stay steady. "What's this about?" The lead soldier stepped closer, visor inches from David's face. "Runaway fugitive, female, non-human, seen near this sector. Orders are to search every house." David's pulse thundered, but he crossed his arms, leaning casually against the table. "You think she'd come here? I live alone." The soldier ignored him and gestured. The others began sweeping through the house, their boots clanging against the floorboards. One moved toward the very spot where the hatch lay hidden. David's breath stopped. He forced himself to speak, his tone sharp. "Careful with my floor. I don't want you breaking anything." The soldier paused, glancing at him, then back at the floor. His device hummed louder as it passed near the hatch, and for one terrifying second David thought the scan had caught something. But then the signal blinked green, and the soldier turned away. They searched a few minutes longer, opening cupboards, pulling blankets aside, knocking on walls. David stood firm, his hands gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles whitened. At last, the lead soldier lowered his visor. "She's not here." "Like I told you," David said, forcing a small smile, though his stomach was tied in knots. The soldiers left as quickly as they had entered, their boots fading into the street. The door slammed shut behind them, and silence returned. David waited, his ears straining for any sign of their return. When he was sure they were gone, he moved to the hatch and pulled it open. Lyra's eyes looked up at him from the darkness, wide and shimmering with tears she had been holding back. Her hands trembled as she climbed out, her legs almost giving way. She collapsed to the floor, gasping, her voice breaking. They were here. If they had found me. "They didn't," David interrupted firmly, kneeling beside her. "They won't." She stared at him, breathing hard, her whole body shaking. Slowly, she reached out and clutched his sleeve as though anchoring herself. "Why?" she whispered. "Why risk yourself for me? You could have let them take me, and it would be over." David met her desperate eyes and didn't look away. "Because I couldn't. Because I won't stand by while someone like you is hunted like an animal." Her hand tightened on his sleeve. For a long time she didn't speak, her gaze locked on his face as if searching for something impossible. And then, in a voice so soft it was almost a breath, she whispered, "No one has ever chosen me before." David didn't know what to say. He only knew the moment he heard those words, something inside him shifted. Protecting her was no longer just a decision, it had become a promise. Outside, the colony remained restless, soldiers still searching, their orders echoing through the streets. But inside that small house, in the space between danger and silence, a fragile bond began to grow. The night dragged on with every sound outside making David tense. Lyra barely moved from the corner of the room, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, eyes darting to the door with every echo of boots on metal ground. When the patrol finally faded into silence, David let out a slow breath, though his chest still felt heavy. He walked to the hidden hatch and pressed it closed again, making sure it was sealed. Lyra's gaze followed him. "They will return," she whispered. "They never stop, not until I am found." David sat down across from her, his voice steady. "Then we'll make sure they don't find you." She shook her head, her silver hair catching the dim light. "You don't understand. I am not just some fugitive. My people consider me property. If I'm missing, they will tear apart this colony until I am back in chains. Anyone who helps me dies." David leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Then let them come. I won't hand you over." Her eyes widened, disbelief flashing across her face. "You would defy them? For me?" "I already have," he replied. The room fell into silence again, but it was not the same silence as before. It was heavier, charged with the unspoken truth that they were bound together now by choice and by danger. Suddenly, a harsh knock rattled the door again, this time softer, deliberate. David stiffened, motioning for Lyra to stay quiet. He crept to the window and peeked through a small crack. It wasn't soldiers this time. A neighbor stood there, a man with sharp eyes and a sly grin, looking around as if making sure no one was watching. David opened the door just enough to block the view inside. "What is it?" The man leaned closer, lowering his voice. "They're searching for a girl, an alien. Some say she was seen near here." His eyes narrowed, suspicious. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you? David's pulse quickened, but his face remained calm. I live alone. You know that. The neighbor smirked, unconvinced. If you did take her in, you should think twice. There's a reward. Enough credits to buy yourself out of this rotten colony. Imagine. New life, new start. David's jaw tightened. I'm not interested. The man studied him for a moment longer, then chuckled. Suit yourself. But if the soldiers find her here, they won't just take her. They'll take you too. With that, he turned and walked away, his boots echoing down the alley. David closed the door slowly, his mind heavy. When he turned back, Lyra was standing there, her face pale, her hands trembling. She had heard everything. You should have given me to him, she said in a broken voice. The reward would save you. You owe me nothing. David stepped closer, his tone firm. I don't want a reward. I don't want freedom bought with betrayal. I made my choice when I picked you up from that market. Tears shimmered in her silver eyes, but she turned her face away, ashamed. You will regret it. Maybe, he admitted, but not tonight. She looked back at him, her expression torn between fear and something softer. For the first time, she didn't shrink when he stepped nearer. Instead, when another distant patrol echoed through the streets, she moved instinctively and gripped his hand. Her fingers were cold and shaky, but she held on tightly. David didn't pull away. He squeezed her hand in return, and in that quiet moment, with danger pressing at their door, Lyra leaned her head against his shoulder. For her, it was a desperate act of trust. For him, it was the moment he realized he could never let her go. The next morning brought no peace. David barely slept, and Lyra had dozed off only when exhaustion defeated her fear. She sat at the table now, silent, her eyes fixed on the steam rising from the bowl of food he placed in front of her. She didn't eat right away. Instead, she looked at him as if searching for something invisible in his face. You risk everything, she said softly. Why? David shrugged, trying to sound casual, though his heart was heavy. Because I couldn't leave you there. Her lips pressed together, her expression unreadable. Then she spoke words that carried a strange weight. Among my people, if someone risks their life for another, it is a bond, not just kindness. It is forever. David leaned back, surprised. Forever? That sounds a bit extreme. But Lyra did not smile. Her silver eyes stayed locked on his. It is law, sacred. If you protect me, you claim me. If I accept, I belong to you. He blinked, unsure if she was joking. So that makes me your husband, he said lightly. The silence that followed was thick. She didn't laugh, she didn't look away. Instead, her cheeks flushed faintly, and she lowered her gaze. That silence was more terrifying than if she had argued. David cleared his throat, suddenly uncomfortable. I didn't mean... You did, she interrupted, her voice firm but trembling. Even in jest, words carry weight. I cannot ignore them. You chose me. His chest tightened. He hadn't thought about the meaning of what he said. But looking at her, broken, starved, yet still proud in her own way, he realized she wasn't treating this as a joke. To her, it was life itself. Before he could respond, there was noise outside again. Soldiers shouting orders, boots hammering on metal ground. Lyra's face paled and she gripped the edge of the table. They are closer, she whispered. David moved to the window, anger stirring in his chest. He had seen enough. These patrols wouldn't stop. They would search every corner, tear apart every wall until they dragged her away in chains. He turned back to her. Then we leave, tonight. Her eyes widened. Leave? You would abandon your home? For me? I told you, he said firmly. I've already chosen. For a long moment, she just stared at him, disbelief written in every line of her face. Then, slowly, her hand reached across the table. Her fingers brushed his, tentative at first, then stronger, clutching as though she was afraid he might vanish. If you go with me, she said in a shaky voice, you cannot turn back. You will carry my bond, my future. David squeezed her hand. Then it's mine already. Her eyes glistened, and for the first time since he had met her, her lips curved into a small, fragile smile. It was gone in a second, replaced by the shadow of fear as another shout echoed outside. But that brief smile was enough to bind them stronger than any chain. That night, as darkness cloaked the colony, David packed what little he had. Lyra stood near the door, wrapped in his old jacket, her silver hair falling around her face. When he joined her, she whispered, If they catch us, we will die. Then we don't get caught, he answered. She nodded, her hand finding his again. This time she didn't let go. And when they stepped into the night together, hunted by an entire world, it felt less like an escape and more like the beginning of something neither of them could yet name. The alarms rang across the colony as David and Lyra ran through the narrow alleys, their footsteps echoing against the metal walls. Searchlights swept the streets, soldiers shouting orders in the distance. Lyra's breathing was sharp and uneven, but she never let go of his hand. Her silver eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, a beacon that could betray them at any moment. They reached the edge of the colony where an old transport ship lay half buried in dust. David had worked on its engines before. It wasn't much, but it could fly. He dragged open the hatch, pulling her inside. The stale air smelled of rust and oil, but to them it was freedom. He rushed to the controls, his fingers flying across cracked panels, trying to coax life into the dead ship. Lyra stood near the hatch, watching the shadows of soldiers growing closer. Her voice shook. "They are coming. If we fail, they will tear us apart." David looked back at her, determination burning in his eyes. "Then we don't fail." The engines coughed, sputtered, then roared to life with a deafening boom. The lights flickered, and the ship shuddered violently. Outside, soldiers shouted and raised their weapons. Blaster fire sparked against the hull. Lyra gasped, ducking as the metal vibrated around her. David slammed the controls forward, and the ship lurched upward, tearing free of the ground. The colony below erupted with chaos, searchlights chasing them, soldiers firing into the night. David's hands gripped the controls tight, his body straining as the ship shook violently. Lyra stumbled to his side, clutching his arm for balance. "Will it hold?" she cried. "It has to," he muttered, his jaw clenched. The ship burst through the outer gates, climbing into the dark sky. The colony lights grew smaller below, but the danger was not gone. Two patrol crafts lifted off, chasing them, their red beams slicing through the night. David swerved hard, the ship groaning under the strain. Lyra gripped the seat beside him, her eyes fixed on the hunters closing in. "They won't stop," she whispered. He glanced at her, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Neither will I." He pushed the failing ship harder, diving between cliffs of rock and clouds of dust, every move a gamble. The patrol crafts closed in, firing again, explosions rocking their hull. Alarms blared inside the cockpit. Lyra's face was pale, but she didn't cry out. Instead, she placed her hand on his, steadying it on the controls. Her touch gave him strength. With one final surge, David pulled the ship into a narrow canyon, the walls scraping dangerously close. The patrol crafts followed, but one struck the cliffside, erupting in fire. The second pulled away, unable to follow through the tight passage. Silence fell, except for the labored hum of the engines. David slowed the ship, his shoulders sagging with exhaustion. Lyra's hand remained on his, her voice trembling but filled with awe. "You carried me through death. You fought a world for me." David turned to her, his chest rising and falling. "I told you. I chose you. I don't regret it." Her silver eyes softened, and for the first time they shone not with fear but with warmth. She leaned closer, her voice a whisper. "Then know this, human, you are not only my bond, you are my future." The ship drifted into the vast sky, leaving the burning colony behind. For David, it was exile. For Lyra, it was freedom. And together in that fragile ship, they carried something neither of them had expected: hope and the beginning of a life they would share.